Rồi mà sao còn nhìn lên trên nhạc rồi quay ra lại quay vào nằm chân trong quạnh đất sáng mai ôm từng từ nụ cười của ai đó làm con tim mong nghe như muốn khóc mà vắt tay lên trên trán mơ mộng được đứng bên em trong nắng xuân hồng xa xa trôi qua trên đây cứ theo ưu phiền miên man tình gieo trên em vẽ lên hy vọng đúng là yêu thật rồi còn không thì ai phía này cứ thế loanh quanh lật qua lật lại 2 giờ những ngôi sao trên cao là người bạn tâm giao lắng nghe anh lên thêm về một tình đô đẹp tựa chim bao có nghe tôi đặt tay ngọt ngào biết anh si mê em nhường nào ít khi văn thơ anh giạt rào nói như muốn quên luôn còn cao nắm đôi tay kêu xa được một lần không ta nghĩ qua tôi có tim trong mình đập tung lên giống nóc thùng nhà hóa ra yêu đơn phương một người hóa ra khi tơ vương một người hóa ra đang vẫn ngồi cười cứ ôm anh đi ôm anh đi ôm anh đi ôm anh đi ôm trong cơn mơ trong cơn mơ trong cơn mơ trong cơn mơ đôi tay có khiến anh vui đến lên nhớ như em đang bên chắc cũng có bao câu thơ ngọt ngào muốn em đặt tên cứ ôm anh đi ôm anh đi ôm anh đi ôm anh đi ôm trong giấc mơ trong cơn mơ trong cơn mơ trong cơn mơ yêu đến vậy thôi phát điên rồi làm sao ra đêm nay không ngủ anh đi lên tủ nhưng mà đang tranh thủ chờ và suy tư bao nhiêu cho đủ yêu em mơ mơ mình tôi yêu không quan tâm ngày trôi yêu thằng em bờ môi yêu đơn phương vậy thôi lại còn trôi còn tim theo chung đập lạc lối lên hồi đừng trách tôi nhưng cơn là này vậy là chết tôi rồi lại càng nhiều thêm tình yêu cho em lại càng nhiều thêm muốn nắm được bàn tay đâu một lần xuống sân trên sâu cho từng câu ca dịch thêm những ngôi sao trên cao là người bạn tâm giao lắng nghe anh lên thêm về một tình đô đẹp tựa chim bao có nghe tôi đặt tay ngọt ngào biết anh si mê em nhường nào ít khi văn thơ anh giạt rào nói những muốn quen luôn còn cao nắm đôi tay kêu xa được một lần không bao nghĩ qua tôi có tim trong mình đập tung lên rung nóc thùng nhà hóa ra yêu đơn phương một người hóa ra khi ta thương một người hóa ra đến vẫn ngồi cười cứ ôm anh đi ôm anh đi ôm anh đi ôm anh đi trong cơn mơ trong cơn mơ trong cơn mơ trong cơn mơ đôi tay có khiến anh vui đến lên nhớ như em đang bên chắc cũng có bao câu thơ ngọt ngào muốn em đặt tên cứ ôm anh đi ôm anh đi ôm anh đi ôm anh đi ôm trong giấc mơ trong cơn mơ trong cơn mơ trong cơn mơ yêu đến vậy thôi phút yêu rồi làm sao giờ em xinh như một thiên thần như một thiên thần như một thiên thần nói như em là thiên thần nói như nói như nói như nói như nói như cứ ôm anh đi ôm anh đi ôm anh đi ôm anh đi ôm trong cơn mơ trong cơn mơ trong cơn mơ trong cơn mơ đôi tay cứ khiến anh vui đến lên nhớ như em đang bên chắc cũng có bao câu thơ ngọt ngào muốn em đặt tên ôm anh đi ôm anh đi ôm anh đi ôm anh đi ôm trong giấc mơ trong cơn mơ trong cơn mơ trong cơn mơ yêu đến vậy thôi.
Welcome everyone back to Accented Dialogues in Diaspora. My name is Philip Ling. I'm the producer and the MC for the show. And just to give you all a quick welcome and introduction to what Accented Dialogues in Diaspora is. If this is your first time joining, if this is your not your first time joining, welcome back. Accented Dialogues in Diaspora emerged as a space to provide intimate and facilitated conversations between Southeast Asian and Vietnamese cultural producers across the diaspora with our community, so that they can share their work, their stories, their passions, their inspirations, and what they've been working on and up to during and through the pandemic. Today's show is a bit of a special celebration. We're celebrating in collaboration with Kaya Press, a new imprint dedicated to Vietnamese diasporic literature called Ink and Blood. This series aims to bring the incredible breadth of Vietnamese literary voices from around the world to English readers for the first time. So today's conversation will be focusing on translation. We'll be talking about what diaspora means and how we can encourage the future generation of writers, of authors, of cultural producers to share their voices with the world. Before we start for today, I'd like to introduce the host of Accented Dialogues in Diaspora, Viet Thanh Nguyen, who is the author of The Sympathizer, Nothing Ever Dies, Vietnam and the Memory of War, The Refugees and Race and Resistance, Literature, Politics in Asian America. His latest book, the highly anticipated sequel to the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Sympathizer, is The Committed. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to our host, Viet Thanh Nguyen.
Hey, Philip. Thanks for that introduction.
Welcome back, Viet.
Yeah, man, I'm like totally thrilled to do this show, and we have to explain to the audience eventually where we got this name, Ink and Blood. It has some pretty interesting origins. We'll get to that when we talk about our guests. We have a really great show lined up tonight with Isabelle Tui-Pelot, Jana Banerjee, Carla Ashok Brito, and of course our guest of honor, Lynn Papin, and her translator, Adriana Hunter. We will get to those introductions in just a moment, but are we going to do the toast first, Philip, or what?
Should we bring on? I mean, I know this is we're doing a special celebration today, Viet, right? So we've got Tui on. So we'll bring Tui on to talk a little bit about the custom cocktail, and I'll also bring on Vivi from the Radical Joy Bakery to talk about the cake that we've got today, which I know, right. I think Ellison enjoyed earlier today, right?
Yeah, this is a first. We actually got a cake, and I'll let Vivi talk about it. But unfortunately, my kids ate the cake, so I don't get to actually show you the cake today. But those of you who have been with us regularly know that we always have Tui Phan, our mixologist at Mixophoria, with us, and Vivi's a new guest. So let's hear from Tui first about the special cocktail she mixed for us.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Viet and Philip. So I'm Tui, and I run the Instagram account at Mixophoria, where I pair diverse books by diverse writers with custom curated cocktails. And for tonight's cocktail, I'm really excited to introduce a new recipe that I made to complement Vivi's really beautiful cafe carrot cake. And it looks like this, and it's called the Writer's Cup. And I created this recipe inspired by Vivi's cake, and also taking off the structure of a sour recipe, which is a cocktail with 3 components: a liquor, a sour citrus component, and a sweet. So in my cocktail, as your liquor base, you have either cognac or whiskey, and ginger syrup for the sweet, and orange juice as the sour component. And then a little bit of coffee, cold brew coffee in there to match the carrot cake flavors. So with this cocktail, if you don't have cake with you, you can also have it with dark chocolate. It goes really well with the flavors. So I hope you enjoy this tonight, and I'm so excited for the launch of Ink and Blood, and thank you for having me. Cheers.
Cheers. And Vivi, tell us about your cake.
Hi, so I'm Vivi. I'm originally from California, but I'm based out of New Orleans now, and I run Radical Joy Bakery, which is a cottage bakery. All that means is I do this out of my house. So whatever you see behind me is the bakery. So I came up with the Cafe Soda carrot cake, of course, to be very cheesy, out of our diasporic struggles. So this happened in March when, there was starting to be some more coverage around, anti-Asian violence. And I wanted to make a cake of resistance. And so, we all struggle with, are we Asian? Are we American? And so I think this is supposed to represent wholly who I am, because carrot cake is very American. And it's originally, I don't know if people know this, but it's a post-wartime cake. So there wasn't enough stuff around. So what do you make cake with? We have carrots, right? So that was kind of the basis of that. And then I added in our Vietnamese flair by, I have a house-made cold brew that I make with chicory in it. And then we've also got a touch of cafe soda in the middle of the cake, as well as a cream cheese frosting. And then everything's rounded out with, dried cranberries, walnuts, coconut. And of course, it's not too sweet, because that's just not how we do it. thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for making this a celebratory cake today. Congratulations to everyone.
Thank you so much. And, I started off with the drinks and the cake because that's just, like, that's me. Vietnamese people, we want to eat and drink first. But anyway, I'm really thrilled, that we have Radical Joy Bakery here. I think that idea of radical joy and doing things out of our homes and is really a part of the ethos of the Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network. We have been engaging in radical joy for a long time and in this mission of bringing Vietnamese diasporic arts together. A variety of different kinds of arts, including the culinary arts as well. So let's bring the first of our guests on board, and I'm going to introduce Isabel Thuy Pelot to you. She's my longtime friend. We've known her for decades at this point. I'm not going to say how many decades, but she and I helped to start Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network. She is the co-founder and the director of DVAN, and she's the author of This Is All I Choose to Tell, History and Hybridity in Vietnamese American Literature. She's also the co-editor of the award-winning, now in paperback, Troubling Borders, an anthology of art and literature by Southeast Asian women in the diaspora. Hello, Isabel.
Yes. Can you hear me? Yes.
Very clearly.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I'm also thrilled to be here. I love the idea of radical joy. Today is a celebration, right, with the collaboration with DVAN and Kaya. In our travels, it was very clear that it's very difficult for writers from other countries to be translated in English. So thanks to Donna, we're going to, Stephen Kujing, we were able to have this series come together. So Ink and Blood, talking about radical joy, I think Ink and Blood, think about Ink and Blood, I think it resonates with radical joy. It was Viet 30 years ago in the early 90s, where you were identifying as Vietnamese. I was identifying myself as French. I'm mixed, have French, have Vietnamese. A lot of us didn't have the identity of Vietnamese Americans yet, right? We were really newbies. We were both at UC Berkeley trying to think in it, what is this identity politic, Asian Americans, right? As we were forming our identities, we're also interested in the arts and being writers, right? Or being aspiring writers. We start to gravitate with each other's and around cognac and pools. I remember playing pools. And we realized as we trying to write poetry that there were really not too many forums, public space for us, right, to be presenting. So that's why we created this space that we ended up calling Ink and Blood. And I think the title came around cocktail and cognac and cigarettes. It came a long way 30 years later, but with this series, as we were pondering about how do we call this series, this name, among other names, came coming back. And I think it's a gesture toward, where we come from, a shift of identities, right? From Vietnamese to Vietnamese American to French to Vietnamese Americans, ink, the writing, blood. There were so much issues, right? With trauma, longing, nostalgia. I remember our poetry were full of longing and suffering and reholding and hiding. So this is very different now. So the whole impetus with DVAN, Ink and Blood, is really to create a different space for new writers to have this forum. So this is a history of Ink and Blood and of this series.
It's really, I find it impossible to believe that it was 30 years ago, since I feel like I'm only 30 years old, Isabel. So something is wrong here. But you mentioned that Ink and Blood also has a Vietnamese name, and it was Muk Mao. And, deliberately chose it. I think that was actually me. In my limited Vietnamese, I said Muk Mao. How it has a sort of alliteration to it. Doesn't it sound cool? And of course, very melodramatic. And I, at least 30 years ago, was a very melodramatic person. And so it's thrilling to see Ink and Blood from that verb iteration come back as the name of our imprint with the help of Kaya Press. And that's the next person I want to introduce. Neelanjana Banerjee is the managing editor of Kaya Press, an independent publishing company dedicated to Asian Pacific American and Asian diasporic literature. She is a writer and teaches writing at UCLA. Hello, Leah.
Hi, well, hello everyone. So good to see you. Welcome to all of our guests. It's so great to be celebrating the launch of this collaborative imprint today with everyone. I'm really, really excited. We've been working with Isabel and Viet and the DVAN team to get to this day. And it's really, really exciting. If people don't know, the number of books published in the US translated from other languages is less than 5% every year, mostly less than 3%. So being able to do this work, especially to focus on diasporic Vietnamese voices, is really, really exciting and crucial. So excited to be here. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Neela. Kaya Press is actually housed at the University of Southern California, where I teach as well. So it's really an honor for us to have Kaya Press here. And Kaya, by the way, really produces beautiful books. I think it's one of the striking publishers out there in terms of just the quality of its covers, if for nothing else, but also for the quality of its literature. So go check out Kaya Press's website and look at the gorgeous books that they have made. And so I'm just really thrilled that we'll have a chance to publish Linh Papan's Les Eaux de Filles through Kaya Press. Our next guest is Kara Ashoka Brito. He's an associate professor of French and comparative literature at the University of California, Berkeley, my alma mater, and the author of Disorientation, France, Vietnam, and the Ambivalence of Interculturality. He serves on the editorial committee of Ink and Blood and is obviously an expert on our topic today. Hi, Carl.
Hello, everyone. I'm so delighted to be here and to participate in this conversation and to celebrate this this book and the translation of the book as well. So I really look forward to the conversation.
And of course, the book in question is Linh Papan's Les Eaux de Filles. First, I want to introduce you to the translator of Les Eaux de Filles, or she will be translating this book, Adriana Hunter. She is an award-winning translator who has translated over 90 books, mostly works of literary fiction. It's really an incredible list of works that Adriana has worked on. So she's going to be translating this book, Les Eaux de Filles, for us, and we are very, very lucky to have her working with us. Hi, Adriana. You're muted.
Oh, Adriana, you need to unmute.
It's a pleasure to join you from where I'm based in the UK. And I know I sound very British, but I can write American, so don't worry too much about the translation. And I have actually finished the translation of the book, and I'm looking forward to maybe getting some feedback from Kaya Press and having a conversation with them, doing the edits on the book. And it was a really beautiful, beautiful book to work on. So thank you for choosing me.
Well, that's really incredible that you already finished the draft, and we'll get more into the translation process in our conversation. But let's bring on board our star of the moment, Linh Papan. She is the author of several books, including Les Eaux de Filles, which is our first translation project. Les Eaux de Filles translates literally into The Bones of Girls. We'll have to wait and hear from Adriana what title she actually chose. But Linh Papan was born and grew up in Hanoi before moving to France at age 10. Her other critically acclaimed novels include, and please excuse my French, Levé, which won the 2016 Vocation Prize, Tony, published in 2018, and her most recent book, Le Cœur en laisse, from 2021. Please welcome Linh Papan.
Hi, so I'm so delighted to be here. So excuse my English because I'm not speaking really good English, but thank you Kaya Press, and thank you Adriana also for working on my book. So I'm very happy to be here with you tonight, since it's 1 a.m. in France.
And your apartment is beautiful. I love the wooden beams back there. It's very, very French. So thank you for being here.
Empty.
Okay, so now we get to turn back to our culinary guests, Thuy Phan and Vivi Nguyen for the toast. Is that right, Philip?
Yes, and before we toast, if y'all could get your cocktails ready, I just wanted to also announce to everyone watching with us in our audience that we have a silent auction that is going on throughout, not just the show, but throughout the rest of the week. The auction will close on Wednesday, June 16th. We're doing the auction a little bit different this time. If you've been on Accented shows before, all of the auctions are going to be, we're not bidding through the chat this time. It might get a little chaotic if we do. Instead, if you click on any of these links below the items, you'll be taken to a Google form that you can place your name and your bid amount, and then there's a live document that will be updated with the amount of your bid. So please, 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 to support this collaboration between DVAN and Kaya Press, we'll drop the link in the comments. It's bit.ly/IB silent auction. We'll keep it open, and we hope that you all can get the items that you'd want from this collaboration. If y'all haven't seen, I'm gonna try and be rocking these t-shirts coming this summer and fall. So be sure to donate, and I'll pass it back to you, Thuy and Vivi, to do our toast and set off our conversation. So if y'all have your drinks.
Yes. Enjoy the drinks tonight. Thank you for having us. It's an honor to provide refreshments for everyone, and congratulations, Lean. I'm so excited to read your book, and thank you for having this event tonight.
Thank you so much.
If you do have cakes, you can eat it with your hands. You can eat it with your chopsticks. You can eat it with a fork. Do whatever you want, because you all are amazing, and we can do whatever we want. Enjoy, everyone.
Well, thank you so much to both of you. And, one day soon we'll be doing this in person. I mean, we're almost there. And I look forward to actually drinking alcohol, like not by myself. It's really been getting really sad. And even though I didn't get to eat Vivi's cake, I've been eating plenty of other cake. So it's starting to make an impact on me. So thank you so much for helping us inaugurate this celebration for Ink and Blood. I'm going to get to Adriana and Lean soon, but I wanted to start off, asking Neela to tell us a little bit about how this series has been funded, because as Philip has implied, the arts, especially in the United States, this is maybe a different situation in other countries, but the arts in the United States is in rather a sad state because we don't get a lot of state support. We have to raise the money ourselves, and that fundraising has been really crucial to the Ink and Blood series, right?
It's true. It's true. It's exciting. Like I said, we're doing this work that is not being done by mainstream publishers. So it's so important. But Kaya is a nonprofit press. We're going into our 26th year of being a nonprofit and publishing works from the Asian diasporas. And we can't do that work without the support of people like you all, people who this work really means a lot to. And again, we want to just thank the visionary Stephen Kunijang for bringing DVAN and Kaya Press together as a donor and seeding Ink and Blood, giving us the funds to spend the last year really thinking, what does a collaboration mean between two organizations? What do you need to do? And also for DVAN to pound the pavement, to look around, to find the books. And we can't continue this project without support. So we're running a fundraiser right now till June 18th to raise $10,000 to continue publishing books from the Vietnamese diaspora into English. And also one of the things that I think is really exciting about this project, taking American Vietnamese texts in English and translating them back to Vietnamese, which really no one is doing. So we need your support. Big shout out to Stephen. Big shout out to Sun Young Lee, the publisher and editor of Kaya, who will be taking this book, working with Adriana to completion. So we have so many exciting things tonight. We have a great silent auction setup of items shared between DVAN and Kaya. You can get a signed copy of Viet's work, of The Sympathizer. There's beautiful artwork. There's a package of the latest Kaya Press books, so you can learn more about Asian diasporic writing. There's Kaya t-shirts and tote bags. We're even offering a really exciting thing we've never offered before, but a manuscript consultation, a 30-page manuscript consultation, because I know there's a lot of you writers and creatives out there, and I'd be excited to work with you. And tonight too, hopefully the links will be in the chat. You can sign up for the silent auction, but you can also donate directly to our fundraiser. And the first 10 people who donate over $75 tonight will get a special gift from Kaya and DVAN. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Neela. And you mentioned Stephen. That's Stephen Kuenjeng, my friend. The little interesting anecdote about Stephen Kuenjeng. He's a I'm not in the world of finance, but he's a banker. That's probably the wrong characterization, but he's also a great reader. And I want to talk about Stephen because he was an early fan of The Sympathizer long before it won any prizes or anything like that. He flew out to LA to meet me in person. We hit it off, and he became a supporter of DVAN and of this series in particular, one of our major funders. And so we would love to have so your support, whether it's small or large, but Stephen has supported us in a large way, so we're really grateful for that. So Isabel, I want to start with you and maybe draw Lean in as well, because Isabel, you grew up in France. You're of mixed French and Vietnamese heritage. Lean, you obviously have spent most of your life now, after 10 years of age, in France as well. And of course, France is home to one of the largest, Vietnamese diasporic populations, but a population that's really actually quite different from the Vietnamese American population. And much of the energy of DVAN comes out of the United States, but we've been making a concerted effort to acknowledge the diversity of the diaspora. So, Isabel, tell us, from your perspective, what was it like to grow up in France? And how is it different from life here in the United States, where you've been since your 20s?
Thank you for asking. I'm a little bit envious of Lynn. It's a very different time to be in France and being mixed race than when I was in France and being half Vietnamese, half French. Growing up, people in school, my nickname was Shintok, which means Chinese, which is not a good word in French, right? It's a very derogatory word. And I was bullied as Shintok until I was 16. And after 16, I was becoming very desirable, but not as a person, but more as a object of desire and exoticized. So, and it went overnight like this. So I think for me, my relationship to France is very vexed because although I was born there, that's the only language I knew being there. I was never treated as French, and it was very painful, and it took me years to recover from growing up in a very racist culture, overtly racist culture. But as I start to get my way back over there in the summer doing work for DVAN, I realized, especially in Paris, things are very different now. And maybe I can hear from Lynn how it is for you.
Right. So I think it's important to specify that you grew up in the countryside.
In the countryside.
In the 1980s. And Lean's experience is very different.
60s.
You grew up in the 1960s.
I was born in the 60s, mid-60s, and I was in France in the 70s and 80s. I left France in the 80s.
Right. Okay. So then, Lean has a very different experience because she was born in 1995, I think,
very different.
After you left for the United States and came at 10 years of age. So this would be about 2005, a very different era. And if I understand it right, you moved to Paris from Hanoi. Does what Isabel said about her youth growing up mixed race in the French countryside resonate with you, or did you have a really different experience as an immigrant to Paris in the early 2000s, Lean?
Well, I think it's a bit different for me because I didn't send this the racism from other people. They considered me as French because I spoke French and my father was French. But what I realized, and that is, sorry for my English, but is that I was kind of ashamed of my mother when she spoke Vietnamese to me in front of like my friends when I was a kid. And it's something that is quite weird to experiment, to like feel that you're ashamed of your culture, you know, the Vietnamese culture when you come into another country. So it was more something from the inside, not from other people, but from me as a kid, because maybe the society was not open to other cultures. So when she spoke Vietnamese to me, I answered in French, and so it was this like I don't know how to say that. You know, it's really strange to experiment that as a child, like
Right.
not being proud of your mom's culture.
Right. So it sounds like there's still some of the same issues that Isabel experienced happening even decades later, and in the more sophisticated play environment of Paris as well. And from an American perspective, when we're reading about what's happening in France today, there's a lot of tension around these questions of race and culture and difference. These are very volatile topics in France today. There's a certain amount of blame being directed against Americans from certain French people about our American ideas about race and culture being exported to France, and somehow this negatively impacting French attitudes towards the race, culture difference, and so on. Carl, I'm wondering from your academic perspective, if you can just give the audience a quick gloss on what's happening in France right now around these issues, and why are some French people blaming Americans for some of these problems?
Yeah, it's a really complicated and strange moment, and yet it is the continuation of a very long history in France of associating what are often referred to in shorthand as sort of the values of the Republic with a notion of abstracted universal citizenship, right? That theoretically shouldn't take into consideration differences that might be quite familiar in an American context, so racial and ethnic differences and the like. So anything that sort of makes claims on the basis of those sorts of categories of identity is often in the French context is often described as being kind of American style identity politics. And actually, and these are people, in the upper reaches of the French government who are making statements like this right now, along with a lot of other people in France, that way of thinking about identity and belonging in a national context is understood often actually to be opposed to these values of the Republic. So it's actually a very kind of contestatory moment in France right now, particularly in the wake of the protests of last summer, which of course were taking place in France as well, inspired in part by the Black Lives Matter movement here in the United States. So there are, protests ongoing in France around the history of colonialism and histories of racism, the history of slavery in the French context. And all of these things are very difficult, right, to address if the starting point has to be a sense that none of these differences really matter because French identity is somehow a kind of universal category, right?
Right. Adriana, you've translated a lot of French literature into English, but you yourself are English. And I'm wondering if you can give us a sense of your take, on sort of the differences between contemporary French literature and what's happening in the UK and in the United States, because in the United States we when it comes to things like diasporic literatures or literatures by people of Asian descent, we have entire categories, Asian American literature or Asian diasporic literature. We have the so-called hyphenated identities of being Asian American or Vietnamese American and so on. And there's some resonance with that, I think, in the UK. I mean, the racial discourse, cultural discourse in the UK has some similarities to what's happening here. And so you can be a writer, for example, and foreground your hybridized or hyphenated identity, and the audiences will understand that this is a viable way of speaking about yourself and writing. Is that the same, do you think, in sort of contemporary French literature for an author like Lin Papin or others who are of a non-white ancestry?
That's a very interesting question. I think I've always got the feeling that a lot of stuff gets published in France. A lot of stuff that maybe shouldn't even be published. That's not that fantastic. You know, they put out a lot of books, but I feel that until really very, very recently, there wasn't room for any voice that was vaguely could be considered to be marginal. The French were very, very focused on quite a sort of definite line of what they wanted to publish. And it wasn't francophone literature. It wasn't French language literature. It was French, as in France, as in the country of France. And I think now there is an openness to it. There certainly there's been a lot of literature about people making crossings across the Mediterranean, arriving in Europe from African countries and from Arab countries. And there is now an openness, but I don't think there's that same feeling that you were just describing in the States about that there's a whole niche, there's a whole catalogue, a whole genre of this kind of literature. I don't think they've got to that stage yet, and I don't think in the UK we're there yet either.
Absolutely, thank you, Isabel. You've now been fully immersed in both the French and the American worlds. Can I ask you, if you had to choose, would you choose one or the other, or would you think that they're both equally limited in some ways when it comes to these questions of national identity and differences and diasporas and so on? You're muted.
And
no, you're okay.
Yeah, so I think I was deeply hurt growing up in France. So for me, California is home. In terms of identity politic, I think there's limitations, right? So as you know, even DVAN, we always pushing boundaries, like within identity politic. But at least there is a forum. At least there's a place to speak as Vietnamese American. In France, I mean, when I go to a bookstore, you know, a lot of French Vietnamese writers are in the Asian section of the bookstore. And if you don't have a forum to speak, you don't have a voice, you don't have representations, and it's like you're the modern minority because you don't speak, you're not heard of. And then, you know, you may be loved, but not love with your humanities, right? As long as you don't say anything. So in terms of choice between the two places, at this point, for me, I just feel safer in Northern California, which doesn't mean everywhere in the US. It's just here in San Francisco. I found my home. But it's not perfect, of course.
Mm-hmm. You know, what's interesting is that once I went to one of the major bookstores in Paris, and I found my own work categorized under Anglo-Saxon literature. Under Anglo-Saxon literature was everybody from, you know, the UK, the United States, and the assumption, I think, that all of these writers are white. And then there's me of American nationality, so I belong there. So it was an interesting situation to find myself in. I'm sort of trying to sort that out in my own mind. But interestingly, the newspaper Le Monde recently ran a whole profile on Vietnamese American and Asian American writers, and it seems like what's happening in the United States is at least making some kind of impact on French consciousness, because the article simply just translated what we call ourselves. So here we call ourselves Asian American, for example, and I think the translation was Asiatique Américain. So instead of trying to categorize us on French terms, the journalist was trying to just literally translate how we call ourselves. And once that's in French, maybe that has some impact on French discourse as well. So Lynn, I'm curious, for you, given the conversation we've been having, whether you think of yourself as a French author and whether you think you are being received as a French author without any kinds of, you know, hesitations or qualifications or any, you know, any notion that you're not fully French when you write.
Well, I think Maybe because of my name, since I have my father's name, so Jean Babin is a French name. But it depends on the book I write. When I wrote L'Éveil, which took place in Vietnam, my book was in the Asian section. So I think they just mixed things up. But my name is French, so they tend to put me in the French authors section.
Right. That's we've heard that too, right? That the question of the name is so important, so that someone like me, for example, my name would be seen as being Vietnamese, and you know, here in the United States, part of what we've struggled to do is to not concede to the notion that American names are only a certain kind of names, but that we have to change the American discourse so that names like mine, for example, would be considered American as well, or names like Nila's would be considered American too. So, Carl, you know, can you situate for us, you know, the place of Lynn Papin and her work in the contemporary French literary landscape? I mean, number one, it's just sort of amazing, you know, that Lynn is very young. Maybe you don't feel very young, but from my really old perspective, you're really young, all right? And you've already published your fourth novel, and you know, they've been very successful, won a number of prizes. You've been very visible on the French literary landscape. Can you give us a sense, Carl, of what her place is on the French literary landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Lynn Papin's work is a part of a new generation of writers who are, in some cases, immigrant writers. In other cases, are people who have, you know, were born in France, grew up in France, but kind of coming out of the conversation that we've been having, they're all people who are able to inhabit Frenchness and write about Frenchness in a kind of critical or complicated way, right? That expands the sort of national cultural narratives that have been dominant in France for so long, right? And I think that you know, I was so thrilled to be a part of this project and to participate on the board and to read Les Eaux des Filles and to really get a sense of how thoughtfully the book takes up the conjunction of Vietnameseness and Frenchness, but does it from a perspective that is really quite different from any other book that I really know about. And in part, I know we keep sort of harping about this, but the author is quite young, right? And that's something that is really foregrounded and thematized in the book itself, right? So Lynn Papin, the narrator, that is to say, who is also named Lynn Papin, identifies herself as being part of the post-embargo generation, right? So this is a book that is thinking about the relationship between France and Vietnam, both in a long historical framework, right? Because part of what the novel is doing is not only telling the story of this narrator, but also telling the story of her mother, her aunts, her grandmother, her great-grandmother, right? So it is a text that takes up this longer history of France and Vietnam, but it's also a text that thinks about how thrilling it was to grow up in Hanoi in the late 1990s and early 2000s, right? At this moment where Vietnam is being radically transformed and where the relationship between France and Vietnam is also, of course, triangulated by the relationship with the United States, right? And with capitalism and with all kinds of shifts in social forces, right? And to then, right, follow this narrator from that version of a post-colonial Vietnam that is also the post-war and post-embargo Vietnam, to follow this narrator then back to France, right, gives us a completely new perspective on that relationship. And that's one of the things that I found really thrilling about the book.
Right, and we're having a very U.S.-centric conversation because Kaya Press is, and DVAN are based within the United States. But I think it's important for Americans to hear this because, of course, Americans, no matter what our ethnic backgrounds, tend to be very, ethnocentric about the United States. The United States is the center of the world for us. And so the act of translation is really crucial because it brings to American audiences or English speaking or English reading audiences this very different linguistic and national perspective. And it's certainly the history of France and Vietnam is different than the history of Vietnam and the United States. And Kaya Press, has staked a place for itself in being this publisher whose mission it is to foreground Asian American and Asian diasporic and transnational Asian literatures in English in the United States or in translation in the United States. But I don't think Kaya has translated French language literature before, has it, Nila?
No, and we're so excited for this collaboration because it's something that we've been really interested in for a long time. We were really interested in also getting into graphic novels. So several years ago, we were very close, I think maybe at even Viet's suggestion, in looking at the graphic novelist Clement Baloup's work, which is beautiful. But the process, it does get complicated because of translating a graphic novel, or even Kaya usually functions with an editorial board. So we were able to, all of us who couldn't read in French were able to look at it and we're very excited. But the process of finding this work, translating it, then discussing it is a challenge. But we are so it was something that we've really been interested in, and just in general, Kai is really interested in this kind of idea, finding Asian work from around the world, Japanese, Peruvian, Indians in Sweden, all of these things to tell these stories. What is happening in these languages? I think there's so many levels of work that are happening that can be expressed, and that I feel like, as Via was saying, in this country, as we've have such a focus even in our colleges and universities on Asian American studies, which is so important. But how do we, I think all of us are really interested in pushing that conversation. How do we bring these diasporic texts, these authors, and what they're doing into that conversation as we move as a world into a really more global conversation.
Right. Well, I think what we see when we compare, for example, the writings of the French of Vietnamese descent and the Americans of Vietnamese descent is that there is a lot in common. I mean, what Les Eaux de Filles deals with in terms of multiple generations of Vietnamese women and the history of the war and colonization and the immigration experience, all of these are things that Vietnamese American literature deals with as well. But I think there's also some really significant differences, again, in terms of how the French see themselves versus how Americans see themselves. And to me, it's always been really fascinating to talk to the French of Vietnamese descent because their take on like questions of race and of national identity and literary possibility is very, very different from mine. So let's talk a little bit more in more specific detail about Les Eaux de Filles. And Adrian, I want to ask you. You mentioned that you have finished this first draft already of the translation. So tell us about that. I mean, you're a really prolific translator. How long does it take you to translate a book? Obviously it depends on the size of the book, but we'll talk about Leans in particular. And were there any particular challenges for Les Eaux de Filles in this case?
There are always challenges with translation, and they're different every time, and they might be different every day. They might be different every sentence. One of the challenges with this book was that it was precisely the fact that it's a beautiful, beautiful portrait of so many things. It's a portrait of a country. It's a portrait of a way of life, of a family, of one particular girl, of this question of identity. I'm fascinated by questions of identity, and so the whole diaspora question is fascinating for me because there's this whole thing about identity. Is she Vietnamese? Is she French? And she doesn't she ends up not belonging in either country, which is a classic thing of somebody who moves from one place to another. This feeling of sort of being disembodied, and literally she becomes disembodied once she moves to France. And then this terrible yearning feeling of keep wanting to go back, to sort of make sense of what happened to her as a child. And there's a child, just as I was talking about a child. So there was, in a way, it was a big challenge because there were so many elements to it, but I responded to the challenge in the way that I always respond to every translation, which is that I am dealing with the text. I mustn't ever have a bigger picture in mind. I mustn't think, oh, I'm trying to do this or I'm trying to do that. I must always have faith in the author and translate the words that are in front of me. And so that's how I did it. I just responded to what Lynn had written, instead of getting myself tied up in knots thinking, oh, I should be thinking about her grandmother or the war or something else. I focus on the text. And that's maybe, that might sound like an escape route to say that, but it means that my translation is a very genuine response to, and I hope a very faithful response to what Lynn has said in her book.
You know, I've had translators of my own work who have never gotten in touch with me. And I've had, on the other end, translators who've sent me literally 10 to 20 pages of questions on my book. So which kind of translator were you in this case with Les Eaux de Filles?
I'm a not getting in touch very much kind of translator, but that's partly because I hate hassling authors with stupid questions about, oh, did you mean it was his foot in that shoe or her foot in the shoe? Because pronouns work differently in French and English. And I have a lot of French nationals who are great friends of mine who, if I'm slightly hung up on the meaning of something, I'll just go through it with a friend. So I really don't ask my authors many questions. I don't think I've asked Lynn any questions on this text. But as I say, I've delivered the first draft, and I haven't had the edits back yet. So I might come running to her, going, "Help! I don't understand what's going on here." So yeah, I'm not the 20 pages of questions girl. That's not me.
Well, now I have a lot of questions for Lynn about her work. So first of all, let me just say, you published your first book, Levé, at what age? How old were you?
I was 20.
Okay, I hate you. I just want to say I hate you, okay? It's very disturbing to me because I couldn't even write a paragraph, I believe, at 20. So you're naturally talented, but what compelled you to want to write that novel and at such an age?
I think it's because it's what I wrote in Les Eaux des Filles when I was 15. I was like in a bad place, and I had a year between hospital and school, and so I had a lot of time in hospital, and I read a lot, and then I also began to write, and I think it's this year when I was feeling bad that was the beginning of my writing, and then I really quickly sent my book to an editor, and so the adventure begins.
You make it all sound so easy. I'm sure it wasn't that easy. And of course, you know, part of the reputation of your work is that it, especially with Les Eaux de Filles, is that it's based you know, partly on your own life and your own difficulties. Do you mind talking about that, since that's actually going to be a part of that is a part of the novel itself?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think we mentioned before that, you know, when you leave your country, you're kind of uprooted. And so I had this feeling like that I had left Vietnam and I didn't belong to Vietnam anymore, but I didn't belong to France neither. So I was kind of always between the two countries, and I felt that I didn't belong anywhere. So I started to read a lot, and I felt like writing was, well, my country, and I could build something where I could live. And so that is why I wrote a lot.
So I'm curious because you left when you were 10, which is you were old enough then at 10 to be fluent in Vietnamese. Were you reading in Vietnamese before you left Hanoi to come to France? And did you have a sense of yourself then as someone who wanted to be a writer in Vietnamese at that time?
No, because I went to French school. My father was French, and I always I did my study in French. So I never read Vietnamese. I spoke with my mom, and as I told before, when we arrived in France, I tend to like embrace French culture, and I want to look like my friends. So when my mom spoke to me in Vietnamese, I answered in French, and so now my Vietnamese is pretty bad. And it's I think it's real later than I want to come back to this country and understand that I had two cultures and not just one, because when we are children, we want to like to not to be different than other people. And then later I realized that I had Vietnam in my heart. So I went back, and all this is the story of Little Défi, is that how can you build yourself with two cultures?
Right. And I think it's really fascinating because, listening to your life story, I get a sense that you felt displacement, even from your time in Vietnam, because you were speaking French, you were of mixed race descent. And, it's challenging in Vietnam to be different than the majority there, just as much as it is challenging to be different than the majority in France as well. And then you started writing. Who were you being influenced by as a writer? Did you have particular literary models in terms of writers that you were aspiring to be like?
A lot, actually. I read Kafka, Dostoevsky, Victor Hugo, Albert Cohen, really, and in a lot of different countries, also Orhan Pamuk. So I am very curious about reading, and I always like to discover new writers. So it's not like one writer; it's many.
And I believe that you will be reading from your work for us tonight. Is that right?
Yes, but my English is quite bad, so I will be reading in French.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Adriana, you'll be reading the translation. Is that right? Yeah. So Lynn, can you tell us a little bit about the part of the book you'll be reading from?
I chose to read the beginning of the book when the narrator, is it like this is what we say? Where the
Yes.
narrator is in the airport, and the book begins that I say that I'm always in an airport because when I was a child, we always went like to Vietnam and in holidays in France. And so it's like I'm standing in an airport and I don't know where to go, to Vietnam or to France. And so the book begins in the airport when I'm going from France back to Vietnam to like trying to go back to my roots. So I wanted to read this extract.
Right.
Shall I?
Yes, please.
Okay. Comme souvent depuis ma naissance, je suis à l'aéroport entre deux continents. Le pied droit sur l'un, le pied gauche sur l'autre. J'attends un vol et une énigme se dessine, celle d'une terre ronde que les avions contournent en laissant les gens derrière. Cette boule si compacte, ces vies si courtes, ces pays et ces mers, tout en est su, dit, et pourtant la guerre éclate à l'intérieur. Les avions passent. J'attends. Ce matin-là, assise dans un fauteuil, mon passeport à la main. Sur ce document qu'ils ont tous autour de moi, les identités sont inscrites. Le calme est absolu ici, les gens se tiennent. Ils feuillettent un magazine, tapotent leur portable, sans se juger, contrairement aux passants des rues ou aux parleurs des cafés. Non, dans les aéroports, nous sommes tous sur le départ, sur l'arrivée entre le ciel et la terre, avec notre bout d'identité en main, susceptible d'être recalé à tout moment. Monsieur, la carte d'embarquement, passez par la machine. Ça sonne. Enlevez vos chaussures. C'est bon, allez-y. Et des conneries, stay priority. Vous voyagez en business ou en économique? Vous avez le passeport biométrique? Puis les gens, les affolés, les détendus, les pressés, ceux qui s'endorment et ceux qui doublent la file. On est là, à poil, des humains, rien d'autre, sous l'autorité des avions. Enlevez la ceinture, ça sonne. Attachez votre ceinture, ça décolle. On attend. Les annonces se font dans des haut-parleurs. Il est temps d'embarquer. Où je vais? Au Vietnam, à Hanoï, comme il y a 5 ans, 10 ans, 15 ans, comme toujours, chaque fois différemment, chaque fois seul, pour tenter de réconcilier le passé et le présent, les deux continents et mes membres souffrants, pour tenter de me réconcilier. Au creux de ma poche se trouve ce médaillon en étain, vestige d'un temps dont je ne me souviens plus, témoin d'une naissance, tampon sur mon cœur, plus identitaire encore qu'un passeport, moins biométrique peut-être. Ce médaillon, avec sa forme irrégulière, mal dessinée, avec son trou percé dedans, afin qu'on y glisse une cordelette, m'a été posé sur le poignet à la maternité. Et on y a gravé 396, mon numéro de naissance. Je suis le bébé numéro 396 de cet hôpital vietnamien miteux de ce 30 décembre 1995. Et je reviens comme chaque fois. Le bébé de qui? Le bébé de personne. Le bébé de tous les voyages que j'ai fait seul pour en obtenir la réponse. Aujourd'hui, je reviens en paix clore le chapitre de cette histoire.
Wonderful, thank you. And Adriana, you have the
Thank you.
translation for us.
Yes, I do. Okay. I'm at the airport, as I have been many times since my birth, suspended between two continents, my right foot in one, my left in the other. I'm waiting for a flight, and an enigma emerges. The enigma of a spherical planet with planes flying around it, leaving people behind. This compact ball, these two brief lives, these countries and seas, we know and say everything about them, and yet wars erupt on the inside. Planes fly by. On this particular morning, I sit waiting in a chair with my passport in my hand. Everyone around me has this same document, each with an identity inscribed in it. It's perfectly quiet here. People are well behaved, leafing through magazines, typing on their phones, non-judgmental, unlike passers-by in the streets or speakers in cafes. No, at airports, everyone is leaving or arriving somewhere between land and sky, clutching our scraps of identity, in danger of being thrown out at any moment. Your boarding card, sir. Go through the arch. A buzzer sounds. Remove your shoes. Okay, on you go. And plenty of bullshit too. Priority boarding. Are you traveling business or economy? Do you have a biometric passport? And then there are the people. Some panicking, others relaxed. Some in a hurry, or nodding off, or pushing in when others are waiting in line. We're all here, stripped naked, human beings, nothing more, governed by the authority of planes. Undo your seatbelt, a buzzer sounds. Attach your seatbelt, we're about to take off. We wait. Announcements are made over the public address system. The time has come to board. And where am I going? To Vietnam, Hanoi, just like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, just like every time, always somehow different, always alone, in an attempt to reconcile the past and the present, the two continents and my aching limbs, in an attempt to reconcile myself. Deep in my pocket is a circular pewter tag, a vestige of a time I don't remember, confirmation of a birth, a rubber stamp on my heart, more powerful proof of identity than a passport, less biometric perhaps. This tag, with its irregular, misshapen outline, with a hole pierced through it so that it can be threaded onto a string, was put around my wrist at birth, and engraved onto it is the number 396, my birth number. I am baby number 396 from that squalid Vietnamese hospital on December 30th, 1995. And just like every other time, I'm on my way back as whose baby? Nobody's baby. The baby of every journey I've made alone to secure an answer. Today, I'm coming back in peace to turn the page on this story.
Thank you. That was beautiful in both the French and the English. I think we get a sense of Line Papin's talent and prowess as a writer. Again, we're just thrilled to have this chance to publish Les Eaux de Filles in English with Adriana Hunter's brilliant translation. I'm going to turn it over to Neela really quickly for now to give us an update on where we are with our auction and donations.
Yes, thank you so much, Celine and Adriana. It was really wonderful to hear that. Can't wait for more for everyone. So it looks like I was doing some checking, and it looks like we're doing really well. So keep it coming. Our numbers in our fundraiser have leaped up to being in 21%. So we really need your donations. Please make them, and please, I see some bids on the silent auction as well. So the silent auction will be tonight, and we're so excited. We're going to keep it running throughout the weekend into the middle of next week. So come back, keep bidding on these amazing items. There's a DVAN artist membership in there. There's art by the great Vietnamese American artist Maddie Hun. So keep bidding, keep donating. We really appreciate you. Thank you.
That's right. Art is not free, people, especially in the United States where nothing is free. So we need your support. And we also need your questions. Now's the time that we turn things over to Philip to moderate our Q&A with questions from the audience.
Yes, thank you, Viet, and thank you, Line and Adriana, for such a beautiful reading. Again, please, silent auction. This is your chance to get some priceless items. We've got a couple of questions in the chat. The first one is about, what led DVAN and Kaya to select Line Papin's work. And I'll pass this question over to Isabel and Carl, if you could, since I knew you're on the selection committee, if you could talk about why Les Eaux de Filles was chosen. Carl, I'll pass it to you.
Sure, thank you. Les Eaux de Filles, it's a beautiful book. The writing is quite poetic, but also very engaging. It's a work that is constructed often in the form of a dialogue, often in the form of questioning. The narrator, part of the complexity of the text is that the narrator is addressing herself at various ages, right? So the character of the narrator is sort of split. Sometimes I, sometimes she, sometimes you, and it's a really fascinating way to present the story of a life and of an identity, right? That takes into account the ways in which we're all shattered and fragmented by our experiences. I think the other thing that really drew me to the novel is that it is a text that thinks about bodies and embodiment in really complicated and interesting ways. The passage that Line and Adriana read comes from the beginning of the novel, but it's actually not the very beginning of the novel. The novel opens with a really beautiful and arresting image having to do with the ways in which bodies in the part of Vietnam that is being described are buried in coffins, and then after a period of 3 years, after the bodies have decomposed, the bones are then transferred to a smaller casket. And that, I think, right from that first image in the novel, I found myself really wanting to read this text. And I realized as I continued to read that that image really powerfully resonates with so many other aspects of the text, some of which we've been talking about, and Line Papin has also talked about, because the verb, I think, that she uses to describe that movement of the bones from the coffin into the smaller casket is transverser, which is sort of to pour, but to transfer. And in a sense, it's a word that already makes us think about translation and the process of carrying things from one space to another, whether it's language, whether it's words, whether it's writing, or whether it's a person traveling from Vietnam to France. But also it's about the process of taking up the memories of these generations of women and giving them the form of a casket, right? Which in this case is this beautiful book, Lin Papin, that you've written. So thank you so much for the book.
Isabel?
Yes, you can hear me, right? So yes. I just want to say in terms of the the process. So in the steering committee, we had 6 people. Now we are 7. So beside Carl, Viet, and I, we have Nguyen Huê Mai, Thong Dao, and Ben Trans. And now we have Monique Trong who joined us. So the process is we all do our research and we submit different texts, and then we all discuss the text, and then we have some kind of number. Oh, I'm red from the alcohol. We number them and then we discuss them. So you heard Carl's pitch, right? Why he loved this text, right? The challenge is also the language, right? Because we have people on the board who, we try to have people with different language skill, but that's a challenge. For me, right, I start to read the text, the writing, number one, really draw me in, right? The poetic of the language, the short sentences, the immediacy of the language, its ability to convey, exactly, the emotions and what the little girl perceive and receive. So start with the language, but also what Carl said in relation to the perspective. It's a post-war perspective. Is Vietnam is presented as a place of joy, a place of love, to different women, right? The auntie, the grandma, the nannies, and the word born. I think it's very difficult to translate, right? Like les eaux is also mean, phonetically water, right? Les eaux is also resonance with memory. Also, bond is like skeleton in the closet, right? Love that skip a generation, and here this little girl get to be receive all this love, right? But also at the cost when she uprooted out of Vietnam, and then what happened when she goes to France? France is not represented at the place where this is a better place. This is progress. This is civilization. This is, lucky to be there. No, France is represented as a place of loneliness, is gray, is a source of alienation when the characters and losing a part of herself and the mental health, and speaking from their takes courage. And I could, it did resonate with me because of my own personal relationship to France. But the perspective and representation of Vietnam and of France was different. And again, also the return to Vietnam and the slowly acceptance of letting go of Vietnam, embracing France, but this is reluctance, immigration and acceptance, and reluctance settlement in France. So it's not like this straight linear immigration when everything is great. It's just like realization that people move on, realization that new connections being made is painful, but it got to be accepted and grow from there. But it's a complicated story, it's a beautiful stories, and to be narrated from such a young person perspective, there's a truth to it that I think only youth can convey, that I personally love.
Thank you both. And I think, to the points that you're making, it seems as though Leo Defi really complicates this figure of the grateful or good refugee, right? In France particularly, and through the translation of certain words. And I think, through this project and through this publishing, and we're able to really call into to highlight the complexity and the nuance of what it means to be Vietnamese in diaspora, right? All the good, the bad, the joys, and the skeletons in the closet, which I think is a really beautiful way to describe what it means to become diasporic, or to see ourselves as diaspora, and as Lean put it earlier, to still have Vietnam in our hearts, right? I want to pass on one more question from the audience to both Lean and Adriana. Lean, we have a question that asks from Vina. Did you have any concerns about having your book translated into English? And then Adriana, there's a question about the book being full of French wordplays and how you dealt with them. So if both of you could speak to the way that you use words, but also translated them to evoke the sense of diaspora.
Yes.
I'll pass it to Lean first.
Well, yes, what Adriana just read was fantastic. So I think that my book is in good hands. So I'm sure the translation will be good. And my English is not very good, but I can still understand. But this book has also been translated in Swedish, and so I cannot understand a word. So I think the writer has to let go the text, so we are not. It's very it's a strange relationship, because it's not our book anymore. It's the reader's book.
You asked me about, or the question was about the word games. Actually, this book had a lot fewer word games than other books I've worked on. And I really, really enjoy playing with words. It's one of my things that I do. But in this particular book, there was one word game I just could not recreate, which is, somebody's already mentioned, I think it's Viet, it was you, that the word for bones in the plural sounds like the word for water. No, maybe it was Carl who mentioned this. And I had to let it go, and it goes against my nature. I'm not someone who gives up on anything, but the word bone, the bones themselves were so important. I didn't want to, if you forgive the pun, I didn't want to dilute the image in the English language by trying to rather laboriously bring in the references to water. There are lots of references to water in the book, and of course I've kept them, but I couldn't make that resonance happen for the reader. I couldn't make them hear bones when I'm talking about water, or water when I'm talking about bones. But I wanted also to say, when we were talking earlier about that, when Carl mentioned the very opening sequence in the book, which is about how people are buried and how the bones are then transferred. I love the fact that this came right at the beginning of the book, because it's almost as if Lean is saying to the reader, hold that thought. I've mentioned these bones right at the beginning, and it's almost as if you're carrying them with you all the way through the book. You're holding that thought, and it's also a strong cultural marker. So you're holding that marker of the culture she's come from, and carrying it with you all the way through the book, from the countryside to the city to a whole new continent, and then back again.
And it's also, if I could just say one word about that, it's also so great that it's the beginning, the very beginning, the very opening, an image that you would associate with endings or death. And that pun that is untranslatable, I think it comes up explicitly at a moment where Lin, she talks about la poche d'eau, which can be either, right, the bag of waters associated with pregnancy and birth, or the bag of bones, right, associated with death. And so, as you say, Adriana, right from the start, the text sort of pushes us to rethink the relationship between life and death, and the possibility of carrying those bones and giving them a new form of life in the form of the text. and in remembering and in telling the stories, right?
Yeah. Seeing the title is difficult, Les Eaux des Filles, because it's a bond of girls, but also the water of girls, right? And it's like coming of age stories, and by using the word the bonds of girl, you cannot translate the double meanings. But as you say, you got to let it go. Yeah.
I think it's better because there's the text has a sort of beautiful poetic simplicity to it. And it's better to let go than to do something that's labored and heavy and is sort of drawing attention to itself, saying, "Oh, look at me! I'm being clever. I've done a pun." In French, it works so sort of innately, and I didn't want to labor a point in order to recreate that.
Right. I mean, thank you all so much for engaging in this conversation. I think we just lost Lean. I know it's like 1:30 or almost 2 a.m. in France.
No,
right now.
it's almost 3 a.m. in
Almost
France.
3 a.m.
Oh, it's 3 a.m. Oh, wow.
It's almost 2 a.m. for me, but I think she froze. She's
there
coming
she is.
back. She's coming back.
Yes, we got Lean back. And hi, Lean. How are you?
I have a question for Lynn.
Oh, yes.
I disappeared. My phone had a problem. Sorry.
No worries. You're good. Isa, go ahead.
Yes, I have a question for you, Lynn. You're very well known in France, and people wrote about you as a person and your work a lot. Are you very happy about how the reason why your work and you is being loved in France right now in totality?
The reason why? Sorry,
Why people love your work? I mean, do you feel like people love your work for the right reason?
Well,
Do you think people understand what you're trying to do?
I'm not so sure. I don't know, but I'm happy that my editor follows me in my choice, and I have the same editor for my 4 books, and I'm still writing my 5th book with this editor, so it's a great story between us, because when I first met him, I was 19, so now I'm 25, and it's like growing up together. So I'm quite proud of this, but I don't know if I don't even know if I know what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to understand things and write, and maybe maybe it will create something and it will make sense, but it's just I don't think I have I'm not really interested in reading comments, and I think we can also get hurt by doing this. So I'm kind of in just my world.
Right. And Lean, we have one more question from Tuik Gong Tong Nu, who asks, how did your family respond to your books? I think we get that question a lot for all of our accented guests. And if you could tell us about any upcoming online book talks that we can join in on.
I was afraid of my mother's reaction, because it's a book on her story and her childhood, and so she is on the cover of the book. So I think it must be difficult to be the character of a book. I mean, when I'm the writer, so I can write whatever I want about my character, but she cannot control what I will write about her. So I was afraid that she would be like mad or not happy about it, but she was really proud to be on the cover of the book with her sisters and with her mom. And my grandmother passed away, and I couldn't be here to her funeral, so it's also a kind of homage. I don't know if we say this in English, but for her. So my mom was really happy, and it creates a link between us. So it's like our relationship went stronger after this book. So I think it's the only book that had a resonance with my real life after it was published. So this book is like very precious for me because it's a book on my mother, but it is also a book that changed my relationship with her.
Well, that's a really great note to end on, actually, that that literature and the writing managed to bring both of you together. And you know, and your book brought all of us together. And I'm really, we're all really grateful to have this opportunity. We're also really grateful both to Lynn Papin and to Adriana Hunter for being here, particularly because for them it's 2 a.m. London time. For Adriana, it's almost 3 a.m. Paris time for Lynn. So we're really grateful for you staying up late to be with us. And so this has been the inaugural event for the Ink and Blood imprint that DVAN is putting on with Kaya Press, with the support of many generous sponsors and donors. We hope you will join the ranks of those generous sponsors and donors to help us continue publishing and translating books from other languages besides English into English. That's really a crucial part of the work of publishing is translation, and it's such an under recognized and under heralded kind of work. So I really also want to say a special thank you to Adriana for doing this kind of work that's so often not recognized and takes place behind the scenes, but is so crucial to spreading the word about great literature. And we are super proud that we will be the first American publisher, probably not the last, to bring you the work of Lynn Papin. As for Accented, we've been really busy these past few months, putting on a lot of events, bringing you artists and writers from all over the place. And we need a break. So we're going to take a summer vacation for a month or two before we come back. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Thanks to Carl, to Isabel, and to Neela as well for being with us tonight. And we will see you soon to continue talking about Vietnamese diasporic arts and literature. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you.
Bye.